Okay, there isn't exactly a great way for me to shoot this because I got a few things spread out, so I'm just going to do my best here and try to talk loud so that you don't have to crank your volume all the way through the roof. So first off, there are a series of things that I do for rehab of the quadriceps. You might have a strain, or you might just get dinged playing a game. You know, you're playing football or something, you take a helmet to the quad, that'll leave a good bruise. So whenever you're doing these exercises, I want you to really focus on good smooth movement because you're trying to rehab an injury. So don't just ballistically slam through it. We're trying to actually re-strengthen the quad and get good blood flow to it and help the tissue to heal. So the first thing, and I spared you guys me dancing around in my underwear, is blood flow restriction. So I like this in terms of rehab. I'm not a huge fan of people doing BFR for other reasons, but I think it is great as a rehab tool, especially if you can't squat heavy. BFR is a good option because you can still get some good stimulus into the tissue even though you're not able to load it optimally. So what you want to do is you can either get the Voodoo floss bands, or you can get just the regular knee wraps that you use for like powerlifting squatting. You want to put those up as high as you possibly can on your thigh. Like, you really want to get them way up here. It's very important that you don't over tighten them. You only want to restrict the venous return, right? So you want to stop the blood from going back up, but you don't want to put it on like a tourniquet to the point where you're cutting off arterial blood flow. So don't use tourniquets. I have seen guys think that it's okay to use tourniquets. It's not. Tourniquets are way too much pressure, and especially if you know how to properly apply a tourniquet, you're going to manage to crank that off and cut off arterial blood flow. We want blood to go in, but not to come back out. That being said, the very first exercise I'm going to talk about is you doing basically air squats with the blood flow restriction. So you're going to put those bands on real nice and tight. Okay, you're going to get a good stance. You're going to do an air squat. All right. So you're just going to drive back and forth through this range of motion, right? Doing air squats till you kind of get a good pump going. It might take 20 reps. As soon as you finish that, you're going to sit down. You're going to kick your legs out straight like it's a leg extension and lock them. And I'm actively flexing my quads. So like I'm really pushing hard and I'm flexing my quads, and you're just going to hold that. You hold that for a minute, and then you get up. You go right back into your squats. You do another 20 reps. And then you sit back down. Walk those legs straight. Push, 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 push as hard as you can. So you're really going to flex that quad in that position. Think of it just like if you were using a leg extension machine, but this time you're not using any weight. You're going to walk your leg completely straight. Now, that's the first stage of rehab. Eventually, you can start doing, your squats with weight, and then you can also put ankle weights on, and then that with the ankle weights. But your first stage, like your very first stage of the whole thing, don't use weight because you're recovering from an injury. So don't push it. Get a feel for it. It's better to start small, start too light, and then load later. Because if you start too heavy, you could cause further injury or a re-injury, and that's not a good option. So in the interest of recovering, err on the side of too light. So first, you're going to do the air squats unweighted, and then your locked out isometric leg extension, completely unweighted. Later on, you can move up to using weight, load very gradually, and using ankle weights for the leg extension. Okay, that's the first one. Okay, the second one, I don't have a name for this. So I would like to call it like a modified Hatfield squat, because you're going to use your hands to assist. There's two different ways you can do it. You can take a heavy band, put it around something, and you're just going to lean back when you squat. You're going to do reps like this. And then, after you, 15 reps, you're just going to sit down at the bottom. And I want you to make sure you're leaning back and kind of stretching the quad at the bottom. Okay? The other way you can do it is you can actually use rings. It's a little tricky because you have to figure out the distance you want to stand from the rings, but you're basically going to do the same thing. You're going to use the rings to support the squat. You're going to squat down and up. And you want to kind of squat back. And like I said, it's a little difficult to figure out the range. Once you get it, you're good. There. And so it's not a vertical squat. I'm kind of pushing back, and it's really hammering my my quad here because I'm extending with the quad and pushing way back, okay? And then your rest, you're going to sit here and just let that stretch. Try to get a really good stretch in the quad at the bottom. You might have to play the foot position. You might have to stand closer. Same concept. Now I'm hitting the floor, but you're going to squat here, work the quads, maybe 15, 20 reps, and then you're just going to rest right here for a minute, sitting in this position. So same as with the isometric leg extension, you're going to sit there for a minute, and then resume the squats. Same thing here. You're going to do those, and then you're going to sit in the bottom for a minute and really try to get that stretch in there. Okay, that brings us to the third one, and like I said, you can load these over time. So eventually you could even put on a weight vest and do these with a weight vest on, or you could do Hatfield squats if you have a rack. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have a safety bar and a rack, by all means, take advantage of it. The last one, again, we're going to talk about doing them unweighted first. You can load all of these exercises later. So the last one is going to be air squats. I think I got a little too close. And you're just going to do your air squats, okay? Try to get good depth, up and down. And then, after you get 15, 20 reps, you're going to do what's called a lean back quad stretch. So you do 15, 20 reps. You're going to get down like this, sit on your feet, put your hands behind you, and then you want to actually lift your hips up so that you're stretching your quads. So you're going to put your hands down here to support yourself, and then push up with your hips. You're extending that hip, stretching the quad. You'll sit and hold this for a minute, then you'll get up, go back to doing air squats, and you'll get back down, put your hands behind you in that supported position, and push the hips up, stretching the quad. Now, you can do all of those with weight as you progress later on. So instead of doing air squats, you just do your regular barbell squat, rack it, and then stretch the quads. This guy here, like I said, if you got a safety bar or you got a weight vest, absolutely acceptable. Go for it. Same thing with the isometric one with the blood flow restriction. That one, you're going to do your squats with weight and then put ankle weights on or something and do that movement there. The only one I use the blood flow restriction on, by the way, is the one where it has the isometric, okay? And then after you finish that isometric, I should have said this earlier, but I guess it's not too late now. So after you finish that isometric, leave the bands on for a bit. Like just walk around. Leave the bands on, walk around, and really let that build up. So what's happening there is it's kind of nerdy, but it's phosphatidic acid. So whenever the heads pull apart inside the muscle, it releases phosphatidic acid. That phosphatidic acid stimulates mTOR. You guys are probably really familiar with that, or at least most bros are, because they think of mTOR and muscle protein synthesis. Everyone thinks of that with like leucine and protein. Well, you can also stimulate that through mechanical stress. So whenever you create this mechanical stress, it releases phosphatidic acid, and that phosphatidic acid works locally to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and that's why the blood flow restriction is a great option, because you can build up that fluid inside the muscle, and then it triggers more muscle protein synthesis in the muscle. So that's how you would apply that one. So that's what I have for you. There's a million other things you can do to rebuild quads, from step-ups to terminal knee extensions, Bulgarian split squats. There's not a right or wrong answer, nor is there a one-size-fits-all answer for quadricep, like rehab, prehab, return to play. So obviously, if you have a serious injury, you're going to go see your physical therapist. If you have an even more serious injury, you're probably going to end up seeing a surgeon. But where I find that this fits in is basically after people have finished physical therapy, oftentimes they're not back to the point where they need to be to play their sport, right? So you go through all your physical therapy and you're technically recovered because your physical therapist is telling you, hey, you're doing great, you can walk again. And it's like, that's awesome, dude. I used to squat 405 for, sets of 3. So like, there's a big gap between, oh, I'm done with physical therapy and I'm back to my old self. So this is where I would put this. I would not just throw this in whenever you have an injury instead of seeing a physical therapist. By all means, you should see a doctor if you have an injury. This is not medical advice. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm just telling you how I train and what I do with athletes who have had previous injuries. I like this stuff especially as prehab. So guys who had an injury years ago, we don't want them to suffer the same injury again. That's where this kind of stuff can work really well. If you know that you have a weak point because of a previous injury, this type of stuff is great as a preventative measure to make sure that you strengthen those muscles so they're not injured again.